Right. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for joining us. The noonday gun has just gone off in our Cape Town studio where we're based, and that signals the start of our weekly webinar. My name is Neil Peterson. I'm the founder and content-in-chief of Real Estate Investor, South Africa's leading independent real estate content and education platform for over 16 years. And in fact, we come up to our 16-year anniversary this month in September. And so, yes, we're really passionate about serving the South African real estate investor, the industry, and the business community through our digital platforms, rei.co.za, our monthly digital magazine, Real Estate Investor, and our virtual and in-person events. So welcome to our regular Thursday investment webinar, and that's brought to you by Real Estate Investor. And I'm really delighted to be your host and moderator for today's webinar. So today's topic is Guide to South African Property Success. And we're going to be looking at expert insights into the student accommodation sector, buy-to-let, and also look at semigration. More about the topic and our guest panelists a bit later, some housekeeping for the registered attendees who want to view the webinar again or would like to attend today's or just couldn't make it for today's webinar. We'll email you a link, so don't worry, we get this request quite a lot for a webinar recording. You will get a recording, we will send it through to you. Alternatively, you can also access it on the rei.co.za website under the education tab, and you just click on event replays and select your webinar choice for viewing at your leisure. I also want to encourage all of you, our valued audience, to actively participate and interact with us during this webinar discussion. And if you have any questions for the panel, please don't hesitate to ask. And to submit your question, all you have to do is to go to the Q&A box, which is located on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And that's not the chat box, because we know a lot of people go to the chat box and they put their questions in, but sometimes we forget. But it is in the Q&A box. That's for general comments. So we'll deal with your questions during the webinar in our Q&A panel discussion in the final session. So without further ado, let's move on to the heart of today's masterclass and investment webinar, Expert Insights into Student Accommodation, Buy-to-Let, Semigration. So let me briefly introduce our three panelists to you. Our first guest is Rita van Rooyen. She's the CEO of My Student House, an experienced investor, student accommodation expert, also author of the only book published on student accommodation on this planet. And it's called Creating Wealth with Student Accommodation in South Africa. So Rita, welcome. Do you want to greet the audience? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hi to everybody. It's very exciting to be here. And yeah, I'm looking forward to being part of this and hearing your thoughts about what you think what's happening with student accommodation right now.
Good. And it's a two-way street, of course. So that's why it's a discussion. And obviously there's, obviously you're going to talk about how people can get involved and what's happening in the market right now. All right. Our next panelist is Estiani Mark. She's the head of real estate at Lightstone. She's been actively working in the property industry for almost 20 years in property valuations, commercial brokering, residential sales and rentals, as well as property and portfolio management. She understands the real estate landscape and the development of it over a long period of time, and it remains a passion. And she also services the real estate industry, and that's what keeps her focused. So, Estiani, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Shame. Thanks, Neil. Yeah, I think the introduction was good enough for now. Look, I mean, for us, it's about data. So what does the numbers say? And yeah, I hope that what we will share today will also give some guidance to the attendees to understand the market a little bit better.
Fantastic. Now, we look forward to that, because this whole semigration trend that's happening at the moment is very interesting. So, I mean, you're at the top of all of that. So we look forward to hearing on that. Our third guest, it's last but least, Jaco, we left you for last because it was just Women's Month. So, that's why you lost. Jaco is the CEO and founder of Prosperity Enterprises. They're an educational and wealth structuring company that empowers you to achieve financial freedom by investing in property the correct way. So, Jaco, you want to introduce yourself, to the audience as well, please.
Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a privilege and honor to join today on this webinar. And I know that we are going to talk about very exciting things happening out there. And I just want to say that we are sitting in a place of opportunity. There's so much opportunity all around us. And I really believe that you're going to get a lot of value out of today's discussion, and that it's going to ignite you to take some action and to do some things that's going to change your life for the better.
That's fantastic, Jaco. We need that kind of motivation, that kind of energy, and that kind of input from people like yourself. So it's wonderful having you. In fact, it's wonderful. I'm really thrilled to have all our experts here today to share their knowledge, experience, and unique insights into getting success through real estate investment and wealth creation. And we hope for all of you that by the end of this session, you'll not only be richer in terms of knowledge, but also, as Jaco says, inspired to take action and apply these principles in your business and life. So let's get into the first discussion, and I'm going to ask Estiani. Now, Estiani, we briefly touched on the whole immigration thing, and you're right at the top of what's actually going on. So you've got some interesting stats to share us on that. And so I'm gonna ask you to set the scene for us, because you kind of at the forefront. You meant it's all about data, it's all this information. It's so important, to understand what are the trends, what's actually happening out there in the South African property market, but specifically in terms of immigration.
Awesome. Thanks, Neil. So I think the most important part would probably be to understand the market in a broader perspective and a broader spectrum, because the market is made up out of various elements, and not only, we sometimes fall into the trap of understanding the market in the area that we operate in and that we live in, but the market is much broader than that. And I'll give you an example. So where I stay, we've got a lot of sectional title development. So in my previous world, pre-data, I understood real estate to be a sectional title market. But, the reality and the data shows a completely different story in terms of property type. So I think it's very important, and therefore I want to set the scene to understand the landscape of real estate in South Africa. So without further ado, let me just jump into that straight away. So first of all, very important to understand residential. So residential is the biggest market in real estate in South Africa at the moment. So obviously contributing to almost 85% of all properties classified as residential. And I guess with the interesting notions that we currently see in the commercial market post the COVID exodus out of offices and exodus out of commercial properties, we may even see a little bit of an increase there even further because of the repurposement and refurbishment of commercial properties into residential. So that'll be interesting to look out for. And then also just to understand the makeup, like I've mentioned now, in terms of property types. So we've classified that into your normal freehold, sectional title, and then your estates. So in South Africa, majority of our properties are still freehold. Second to that would then be our sectional title, and following by the estate proportion. Although it's very interesting to also see that is a very growing market in terms of estates, and possibly due to two things predominantly, or three things: the lifestyle type you get in estates, the value increase of properties within estates, and then obviously the perceived security element in terms of living in an estate. So understanding the landscape a little bit better, it's also very important to understand where the value segments lie. So in South Africa, we still have majority of our properties sitting in the lower value bands. So that is where majority of our properties are actually contributing towards what we call the value of the volume of properties. So if we look at the number of residential properties registered, which is about 7 million, majority of that falls within our affordable space. Minority in terms of property value types will be your high value property. So only 5% of all the properties is actually falling into that category, although the flip side then comes to the forefront, knowing that although the volumes of our high-end properties are the lowest, they are also the biggest contributor in terms of the value of real estate in South Africa. All right. So if we understand that landscape, it's also important to understand where our properties are based. So we always make a joke about this in terms of Gauteng being the smallest province within South Africa, but hosting most of the residential properties, or not most, but the biggest proportion in terms of residential properties. So 35% of properties in South Africa is actually residential, is actually based in Gauteng. Second to that, sitting in the Western Cape, 18%, and then our KwaZulu-Natal and Eastern Cape, where after all the other provinces have a little bit of a share as well. So very interesting to note how that changes over time as well, although what we can still see is that majority of transfers are still happening in Gauteng as well. So about 40% year to date have been transferred in Gauteng as opposed to the other provinces. All right, so then I think we want to understand or look at migration or semi-migration a little bit more. And this is not something new. I think we've tracked this for many, many years, and the data goes back quite a long time, which I'll not necessarily share today, but the numbers have always shown that there's a notion of movement within South Africa, and it's more or less going to where there's value growth in terms of real estate, but then also where there's a perceived like a good governance, if I can call it that way, where people are seeing the value in terms of their investments, but also in terms of life and the lifestyle and life and living in general. So therefore, it's also important for us to understand, if we look at the next slide being sort of our property inflation tables, because that shows us where is the growth happening in terms of property value in South Africa. Now, we have to understand that real estate is an investment vehicle. So if you think about people having to make a choice in terms of where they actually put their money, whether it is through a loan or equity that they want to use and grow, we have to understand that it has to be viable to put it in real estate because there's other options as well. So people have a choice. And I think over the last few years, we've seen, I think it was Jaco that actually showed me one day that within the last 50 years, we've only had about 3 years that property haven't had a positive return. So it's still a good investment opportunity. You have to just obviously understand where and when to buy. So if we look at the numbers here, we can see that certain areas may not necessarily do that great at the moment. And that is, if we look at specifically City of Johannesburg, seeing a negative inflation, which is something that you really don't want to see in terms of real estate investment. And that sort of can have the potential of driving people out of a specific area towards an area where the growth is actually in a better position. So it's also cyclical. We have to understand in real estate, everything happens in terms of a cycle. So that drives, it's almost like your demand and supply. So the minute that there's a bigger demand in an area, the values increases, and the value so the value increases, and as soon as the value increases beyond a certain point, it becomes unaffordable and the demand decreases again. So that is simply something that we actually saw quite a bit during COVID in your Eastern Cape areas, where a lot of people have opted to go into the Eastern Cape. It was a little bit more affordable, and as soon as that demand lifted and your value actually increased in terms of real estate, the demand decreased again. So it's very cyclical. At the moment, we do see that areas such as your city of Johannesburg and Gauteng, very mature buyer's market. But then if we look at the semigration in terms of trends in South Africa over the last 5 years, so like I've mentioned a little bit earlier, this is something that we've tracked for a longer period of time, which we can talk to in the presentation next week. But if we look at the last 5 years, we can clearly see that the Western Cape is the only province that actually had an increase in the number of people moving towards that province, whereas all the other provinces have seen a decrease, of which Gauteng probably is the most predominant at the moment. So in 2018, 27% migration figures for Gauteng, but sitting on only 19% at the moment. And then on the flip side, if we look at the Western Cape, at a 31% semigration trend or value, and that has escalated to over 45, 46%. So yeah, I think it's phenomenal in terms of areas such as the Western Cape, but I guess with that influx of new residents in an area also will bring its own challenges in time to come. So yeah, I think, Neil, that's from my side. I think that is setting the understanding in terms of where we are at the moment and what the data shows, what the trend shows, and would be lovely to hear what the experience is from the listeners in today as well.
Absolutely. So thanks very much for that, Estiani. Can I just ask you just to close the presentation just so we can get back on the screen? Thank you very much. That was very insightful. And I think it's a great way to set the scene here. And because, you know, we need to know what the trends are, where the action is. And I think it definitely piqued Jaco's interest there, because he was talking about buyer's market. That's when he jumps in and looks for opportunities and that kind of thing. But also the movement of people and then what it does for property, because obviously real estate grows as obviously where all the people move. So very interesting. Thanks for that intro there, Estiani. I think you set the scene fantastically for a great discussion, a great webinar. So Jaco, we're going to move on to you next. And so you can tell us, you're the investor guy over here. And so, you know, you've heard Estiani's presentation. Why should people go into buy to let now? I mean, there's a lot of negativity around at the moment. You know, so people are looking and they're saying, no, it's not the right time. I don't have money to get into property, and all these different excuses. It's just one excuse after the next. So maybe you just tell us through your eyes, you know, where those opportunities are, and give us this, you know, open our eyes to this whole investment opportunity that we have in front of us.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Neil. And thank you for that fantastic data, Estiani. It is always so nice to see this data and to use that to make informed decisions. Now, one thing that a person needs to keep in mind with investing in property is the majority of the time, you are not going to buy and sell property and keep property for very short periods of time, except if you are in a flipping strategy where you buy low, you renovate, or you do something, you sell at a profit and you put money in your pocket in that way. But most property investors, when they invest in property, they actually need to think in decades, because most people that buy property have a 20 or a 30-year bond on the property. They either pay it off or they refinance it, but they keep that property for decades. So the first thing that you need to do as a property investor is get out of the box, get out of the short-term data, everything that's happening right now, and start asking the questions, what is the next 10 years? What are the next 20 years looking like? Because that is going to determine the strategy that you are going to follow as an investor, irrespective of what investment you are going to make. So that's the first thing that I want to say this afternoon, is that you need to get your head out of the box, take a few steps back. I'll do that for us now on some graphs as well that we can look at, and look at the bigger picture, because that's very, very important to keep in mind. Estiani spoke about this graph, a discussion that we had, where you can see that this is the growth that property has shown over the last 50 years. You can see there in 1994, the average size property costed you about 175,000 Rand. That same property today costs you 1.75 million Rand. That's 10 times the value from 1994 to now. The other graph that we spoke about is where you look at property price growth year on year. And this is where Stiani mentioned 1985, 1986, and 2009 being the only 3 years where property prices actually declined if you look at a national average. All the other years, property prices appreciated. You can see there, have a look at, for example, 1981. Property prices grew with almost 40%. A little bit more recent, 2004, we could see there in 1 year, property prices growing with over 30%. And then very interesting from this graph is that if you take any consecutive 20 years, remember we said now that we need to think in decades when we are looking at property investment. Now, if you are taking any 20 consecutive years, your average year-on-year growth in property, even if you take the last 20 years, is close to 10%. So why invest in property? Well, there's two returns. There's your capital appreciation and there's your rental yield. Your capital appreciation is 99% of the time positive. And over and above that, you are still earning rental income from that property. So the reason why investing in property for me is so lucrative is the fact that you've got great growth fundamentals. You've got great returns on property investment. And when you look at property returns, you need to think of both your capital appreciation and your rental yield. Now, something that's quite frustrating for me as a property investor is to see analysts misquote or misunderstand how the returns of property look like, because you would see an analyst writing an article saying, don't invest in property because property has only grown with 3% in the last year, which is accurate. Your property might have only grown with 3%, but they excluded the rental yield, the rental income, the rental cash flow that property generated completely from their analysis, which is a component of your growth which you cannot ignore. So investing in property is great for me because of the consistent growth that we are seeing in capital appreciation and the rental yield that you can generate. Now, I'm very excited to hear Rita speak about student accommodation, because student accommodation is probably one of your investment types or strategies with the highest rental yield, and where one can generate very big returns from a rental yield perspective with student accommodation. Then there's, of course, economic fundamentals. Istiani was speaking about supply and demand, and how demand is shifting and all of that. You know that in 1994, the population in South Africa was just over 40 million people. We are currently sitting with over 60 million people in South Africa. That's a 50% increase in the population in South Africa. And you know what? Each and every one of those people need a roof over their head. Every single one of those 60 million people need accommodation. So the demand for property is going nowhere. It is continuing to grow. And that is why I believe we will continue to see an appreciation in the value of property. And then one of my favorites is the fact that you can use leverage. Neil was speaking about other people's money. Now, that is probably the biggest reason, ladies and gents, why I invest in property. And that is because I don't have to use my own money. I can actually use the bank's money and other people's money and build up an asset base for myself that can create wealth for me and generate decent returns for me. So is now the right time to invest in property? Absolutely. It's when other people are fearful. It's when other people are concerned. It's when the growth isn't necessarily that high or that good, when you want to acquire property, because that's when it's a buyer's market. And that's when you have the opportunity to buy low. Now, I really do believe, with looking at the returns and the growth that property has shown over the last decade, that property is actually quite cheap at this moment in South Africa, and worldwide it's extremely cheap. So it's a good time to acquire assets, the right kind of assets, and to have a buy and hold strategy where you hold those properties for the decades to come. Thank you, Neil.
Excellent. No, great. Thanks, Jaco. That was a great way to introduce, and I think you weaved in very nicely from Estiani up front as she positioned, all the trends. And I think you've convinced everybody that you've got to invest in property, and not next year or wait for it. It's right now, because we're going to see that appreciation value coming through all the time. Okay, Rita, you operating in a different space, and I also want to tell our audience: listen, don't forget about. Please put your questions in the Q&A box. We want your feedback. I see there has been some questions already been posted, but don't be shy. Ask your questions from for Istiani and also for Yaku and Rita. But Rita, you tell us. You're in a different space. I mean, you moved into the space. I think probably 2018, somewhere around there, and you know, what is actually happening in the student accommodation? Because we hear all different noises, because we have the NSFAS, you know, grants that come through, and, you know, we're saying, are they getting paid? Now, we know at the Reside conference that you presented in July, we actually had the head of NSFAS there who said that they spent 19 billion on student grants, on the NSFAS grants, which is a significant amount of money. But tell us, what is really going on? Why should we get into student accommodation? What's the lie of the land there?
So should you, if there's anybody here that's thinking, should they get into student accommodation? I just want to ask, are you freaking crazy? Have you heard how these students are protesting and burning, and NSFAS, the CEO has now been on leave/suspended, we don't know. So it's an absolutely crazy time. There's so much negative press out there, and you know, are you going to get paid? There's so many landlords saying that they haven't been paid, and it's such an easy narrative to believe, right? Because you're going to hear that from the news, you're going to hear that, and bad news sells better, isn't it? So no, you're not crazy, okay? You can definitely get into student accommodation. And I want to also, because I think the good news or the interesting parts in student accommodation isn't shared widely amongst social media and all of that. And that is around these big student accommodation companies, right? Like your Growth Point, your Eris Property Group, all of Respublica, all of those guys, they are literally increasing their student accommodation portfolio by billions and billions of rands right now. So these guys that really, do you think that they will not do their homework before they invest $1 billion into getting student accommodation and building student housing? Of course not. So, you know, we've always been taught on the stock market, follow what the big guys are doing. Well, I'm telling you now, I'm following what these big guys are doing, and I'm going to be big with them. So you're either with me or you're not, or you get left behind. But it's time, guys. You can really get into student accommodation right now. And I think what we also, you know, was interesting listening to the other two panelists, because it's like, how did you look at Estiani's data and you say, well, where must I buy? Which university must I target? Well, guys, Jaco told us there's 60 million people in South Africa now. How many babies do you think they have? Right? They have to all go to university at some point, or they want to all go, right? So there's always demand. And right now there's a shortage of 500,000 beds, suitable beds, obviously, in student accommodation right now. So can these big guys, even with $1 billion rands, they can't fill 500,000 beds? I'm sorry, that's like the whole of Centurion and Midrand put together type of thing. So that is not, it's not possible for them to do it. So normal people with houses, with small buildings, the time is still there. It's still right. You can get in and you can get some income from student accommodation right now. And so we also talk about, but you know, buy low. I don't like to negotiate. Okay, I'm not a good negotiator, so I'm very blessed in student accommodation that yes, we'll always put in a little bit of a lower offer, but I don't have to negotiate hard and very, very low, because my income that I'm going to get is in any case to such an extent that I can afford to pay the bond or whatever finance I get, based, you know, I can afford that bond 3 times over, 4 times over, whatever. So it really just makes, I don't have to negotiate. I have to compete with other people buying those properties because I know my numbers can support it. And a normal house with 25 beds in it, just to give you guys an idea, can get you in almost every province that we're in. We're in the Western Cape, PE, Porch, Joburg, Pretoria, all of those areas, even George, everywhere. You can literally get 100,000 rands a month, okay, on 25 beds. So take a walk through your house today and count your beds. And if you're within 2 to 3 kilometers of any major university, quickly move out, okay, finish it, and you can make 100,000 rands a month on that house next year. So that's you know, and there are literally people doing that right now, that we're also helping at My Student House with their management and their setup and accreditation and all of that. Because, you know, they are close to university and they can almost go and stay in a hotel in that time if they so wanted to, because of the income that they get. And then, of course, I think the other big thing is that Jaco was talking about valuation over time. So you're going to get that anyway, right? From just your property, your normal income going, you know, your normal valuation going up every year, according to the last 50 years data. But the other great thing is that when you go into student accommodation, just as an example, we had a property that when we bought it for 2.4 million rands. We then put students in it, we changed the zoning, it becomes a commercial property, and then the valuation of that property is done differently. And in the training that we'll do next week, Saturday, I'm going to go into detail on how that's done. But your valuation is then that very same property that I had, when we had it revalued based on the income that I'm now generating from that, it was valued at 5.3 million rands within 6 months, okay? So that's like double, more than double in 6 months. And I know people that does that as well. They flip, but they flip student accommodation. So they'll get a normal property, they'll put students in it, create the income, and all of a sudden now I can sell that 2.4 million property. I spent 600,000 on conversion and furniture and whatever else. Now 3 million, I sell it for 4 million, and you can do that within 6 months as soon as you have students in it. So that appreciation is there anyway as well when you create that income. Yeah, and I think I'll leave it at there because I can talk about this forever, but I know there's lots of questions probably coming in. So yeah, let me give some time for that as well.
No, absolutely. There is lots of questions. And for those of you thinking about doing it, do it now. Drop it into the Q&A box, which is on the bottom right-hand side. So I just want to do a brief commercial here. We're going to be live in Johannesburg next Thursday evening. So that's both Estiani, Jaco, and Rita that are here today, along with Bonga. Bonga actually is from TUF, and they are big financiers of property. And Daniel Lombard's very much in the distress sector right now. Very interesting sector too. I think between Rita, Jaco, and Daniel at the moment, the three hottest sectors, which are, you know, that's where the opportunities are, really are. And I think so we'd like you to come along. It is a free event, okay? So it's going to be in Johannesburg, and it's going to be on Thursday starting at 5 o'clock. It's free. It's free, ladies and gents. So to get your code, you just click on, there's a link that will be supplied during the webinar, and you just put in the code, which is REI guest, and you get free entry to that. And you can see Rita live, you can see Jaco live, you can see Estiani live, you can even have a chat with them. But we're going to be digging a lot deeper at that particular event. So I just wanted to show that. And then also I'm going to mention Rita is also going to have a course on the Saturday in Johannesburg on the 16th. I'll give you more information a little bit about that a bit later. But I want to go back now to Estiani. Estiani, very interesting. When you came with that data there, you said there's growth in estates. And so maybe let's just unpack that a little bit, because there was quite a significant shift to estates, sectional title, to normal, sort of standalone real estate. You want to maybe just elaborate a little bit on that? And then the other thing you said, well, all the action is in the lower value bands, the affordable sector. Do you want to just kind of comment why is that all happening?
So I think the biggest thing is, like I mentioned in the presentation, the three aspects being the lifestyle opportunity. So many of the estates that currently are being developed or that people have a choice to live in, it's almost providing you all of the, I want to say amenities, probably not the right word, but that you as an individual would need on a daily basis. So you almost have your shopping centers nearby, some of them even within, if you think around the waterfall, the midstream, you almost have your shopping almost within the estate. You've got schools in the estate. It's almost like you don't even have to leave the estate for anything other than if you don't work literally from your home or within that estate. So I think that lifestyle choice greatly adds towards the decision to move into an estate, and also the ability to move around. So you'll have your people wanting to walk in the evenings or in the mornings, walk their dogs. So, you can't necessarily do that on a normal street, but within an estate, that's the type of lifestyle people choose. But then also the value. So the supply of properties within estates are much lower, which means the choice or the options are much less than a normal freehold property. And obviously where the supply is less, the demand will get higher because the value is within that. So I've actually done seminars around the country. We do it every year and we're almost done. And within each of the regions that we've done, so each of the provinces, you can see that in estates, the value growth that they obtained was sometimes well in excess of 10-15% on properties within estates. And if you think around the value nationally being around 3-4%, there's a massive difference between a property in a estate, the value that they get there, than a normal property in another area. So definitely those two elements. And then I guess the security element, which is a reality for South Africa. So yeah, I call it, from my own experience, perceived security, because I think there's no way you can say that, you're 100% secure. But I guess within an estate structure, there's various things that the estates will try and do to give that sense of, or that a layer of security that you don't necessarily get in a freehold property.
Excellent. Great. And I also saw Yaku nodding sagely there, lower end, all that kind of stuff. So Yaku, you want to let's talk a little bit about where are the opportunities? And maybe, given the data that Estiani presented and stuff, is it kind of like she hit the bullseye?
Very good question. And I would say one needs to take one step back and ask yourself, what is your approach or your strategy going to be when you are investing in property? Because there's not one right strategy or one right approach that you can take. I want to say each strategy is almost like a sport of its own. Student accommodation is definitely a much different strategy or approach than somebody investing in townhouses, for example. The two components of your return is capital appreciation on the one side and rental yield or cash flow on the other side. So the question that you are always going to ask yourself as an investor, first and foremost, is, for what am I going to invest primarily? Is my primary focus going to be on capital appreciation? Because then what Estiani said makes sense. You buy a luxury property in an estate, you've got good capital growth, you've got good capital appreciation, and that capital appreciation creates wealth for you. Or is your focus on cash flow, where you would go with RETA strategy, where you are going to, for example, invest in student accommodation, and you couldn't care less if the property appreciates or not, even though it does because of the yield that it generates. But your focus is not on what the properties are worth. Your focus are on the cash flow that property generates on a monthly basis. So where do you start? What's the best place to start? Now, for somebody starting out, I think your home can be a great investment if you do it correctly. Buy it in your entity, rent it from your entity, and treat yourself as a tenant and your entity as a landlord. If the numbers of that property make sense, we call it a buy-to-live approach or strategy, then that's definitely a great place to start. And then the next step that you need to ask yourself is, what approach or strategy am I going to take for the next couple of properties that I'm going to acquire? And a very big question that you have to ask yourself is, do I have access to capital? And to how much capital do I have access to? And then in the same breath, how much time have I got and how involved can I be in this? I've got clients that had no capital and they focused on cash flow strategies, affordable accommodation, for example, in the central business districts, where cash flow was very good, but where they didn't have to have big capital outlays. Then I have other clients with big businesses that are extremely busy, that doesn't have time to run a portfolio of many low-cost accommodation properties, and they are buying properties in the V&A waterfront and on the Atlantic seaboard, and the capital appreciation of those properties are generating a good return for them. So there's definitely not this one approach or this one strategy that works for everyone. You are going to have to sit and see, where am I going to invest? I love to invest in townhouses, and the reason for that is you still have that perceived security that Estiani speaks about. It's low intensity, low involvement, because there's a body corporate that takes care of the complex, that takes care of the gardens and the security and the pool and the gate and all of those things. And the capital appreciation over time makes it worthwhile. But the cash flow isn't necessarily the best, but it's also not the worst. So you're going to have to decide in which in which area you are going to invest. And if I may still have a minute or two, Neil, I just want to mention here that when it comes to you setting your strategy in place to invest in property, you need to make sure that you are building it on the right foundation. As a property investor, you don't want to buy property in your own name. One of the first things in structuring that we learn, Structuring 101, is you don't want assets in your name and you don't want debt in your name. The reason why you don't want assets in your name is because of asset exposure or the lack of asset protection, and also the fact that one day when you die, you are going to pay a lot of costs on having these assets on your name. So, and the reason why you don't want debt in your name is the more debt you accumulate in your name, the more difficult it becomes to get financing. So you want to have the right structure in place. You want to buy your properties irrespective of the strategy that you are following and the types of properties that you are buying. You want to run your property portfolio like a business, which means own entity, own bank account, and financial statements. So the way that your structure needs to look like then, after you've decided what your strategy is either you need to own your properties in a company with a holdings trust being the shareholder, or you need to own the properties directly in a property trust. But do not own property in your own name, and do not own property in a company where you are the shareholder, because in both of those aspects, your assets are exposed. There's a lot of costs on debt. Owning property in your own name limits your capability to get financing, and you lose out on some great tax benefits. So that is something very important to keep in mind when it comes, after you've decided what strategy am I going to follow, to make sure that you put the right structure in place to execute on that strategy.
Excellent. Great. I don't think you could have put much better than that. And I know there was a couple of questions around structure. And I think structure would also be important if you're looking at student accommodation rate as well. So I know, for some people, they look at student accommodation, and you mentioned, like, for example, a house that you could put multiple people in there. And because you're getting more than one source of income, you're getting multiple sources of income. And I think the income attraction in student accommodation is definitely the big thing. And so just to elaborate, because I know Estiani Lightstone does commercial valuations as well. So, and maybe I think, Rich, you can just elaborate just on that question, but also we're now moving. Is it a commercial investment? Because some people say, "Hey, geez, I'm not ready yet for student accommodation." And I know if they come to your course, they will be ready, because I was convinced, and it's in such a way, it is a reality that you can move quickly. So maybe just give people a little bit of an idea how they could quickly jump into that. How they could jumpstart themselves. Yeah.
So I think. Sure, so many questions there.
I know. Sorry to lay it onto you, but I know you can handle it.
Boy, I don't care. It's fine. So
Good.
I think, well, number one, definitely structure is important, because in student accommodation, you sit with the challenge of if you leave it in your personal name, you will hit 45, what is it now these days, 45% tax, okay? You will, and you don't want to do that. So definitely put it in a company and go chat to Yaku on how exactly to do that and get it going and so on. But don't do it. I had, when I started, I did properties in my own name. I was going to flip them, build, sell. Market turned, I couldn't sell. I was stuck with these things, and I could not, for the life of me, pay all that money to now move it to a company. So eventually, I just sold a couple of years later. I had to sell it to get rid of it. So don't do that, okay? Don't be me. So, but I think with student accommodation, answering how can you get into that quickly? If you feel you're not ready, okay? Also remember that all of these strategies we're talking about doesn't have to all be done in isolation. You can combine them, okay? So you want capital appreciation, go to the V&A waterfront, get yourself a property there, and then you take one of the rooms in the house and you make it like a little black bachelor, you put 2 students in there, you're generating 16,000 rands. And in the rest of the house, you put a normal tenant, right? So now you're getting that capital appreciation that you wanted. You're in a very hot area. And guess what? December, the students aren't there. So you can go and stay in your little flat there in the waterfront and party there on New Year's Eve. So you can, or Airbnb it and generate other money in that time. That's also fine. So you can literally combine Airbnb, student accommodation, capital appreciation, and a normal tenant, just for your own sanity's sake, to not have 25 students. You can combine it. Try it out. If you don't like it, you can always rent out that student flat then to another tenant the next year again. So you can have it all, okay? By just combining it and trying it out and see if it's for you.
Excellent. Okay. We've got a lot of questions that have come through here, and I don't want to pass it, but I just want to get a comment also from Estiani, because I know it's more difficult to track student accommodation. I know there are obviously commercial companies like Rita mentioned, Growth Point, that buy buildings. Era's property, 3,000 units in the center of Cape Town, which you went to, Rita. You went to go and see. I mean, 3,000 students in the CBD of Cape Town.
Mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. I loved it.
But it's
I'm
just
planning a trip when it's all finished again.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think it's interesting to see how property trends have moved and how it's moved. So Estiana, coming back to you in terms of all of that, now, how would you be able to track that from Lightstone perspective? I know you in sort of more the resi, but also commercial sector in terms of valuing properties and that kind of stuff. Is it something that you could look at down the line, student accommodation?
No, I think it is something that we probably need to start tracking. I guess the reality is just always that, how is it registered within the deeds office, as an example, because you would probably want, or you'd probably remain, or it would probably still be registered as a residential, depending on the size, I guess. So if it's a commercial building, and you repurpose it in terms of staying or student accommodation, I guess, so it comes down to how it's registered within the market. So if you look at commercial, currently commercial is segmented into office space, retail, and industrial, because those are the nodes in terms of commercial property. But I guess, look, I mean, it's something that, as Rita has mentioned, is a growing market. So it's probably something to look at.
I think so.
If you can track that. It's not. I'll get some details from Rita and understanding how it's registered, but. I think it's a good thing to start tracking and seeing it, especially around the universities and educational hubs, definitely.
Yeah, because a lot of those companies obviously have PTY limited, so they own the entire building. So probably the best would be to start. So technically, a student accommodation in its entirety, like, for example, the Era's 3,000 student building and the one in next to Pretoria University, I mean, it's 2,000 units, which is owned by Growth Point. The other one's owned by Era's. That is a commercial building. if you look at it in that interview. So maybe that could be the place to start. Just an idea. But anyway, I'm diverting a little bit, and I'm now going to get to the questions. So ladies and gents, we are going to get to your questions. Thank you very much. I just want to mention, please, for those of you in Johannesburg, we'd love to see you next week at the Money Summit Property Investing Forum. Jaco's going to be there, Sian is going to be there, and Rhett is going to be there. And Rhett is also going to stay longer in Johannesburg. On Saturday, she's running an event as well. So if you really want to get to understand student accommodation, she's going to give you the whole rundown. She wrote a book. She understands this thing. She's investing in it. So there's a lot to learn from that. And so did Yaku, by the way. Yaku also wrote a book. And he's also a guy which you can learn and invest alongside as well. So I'm going to come to the structuring thing first, because before we get into the actual questions, I see there's quite a few questions around evictions on student accommodation and that kind of stuff, which I think you love that subject there, Rita. And then I'm going to talk about the structure, and it's almost a three-way question here, and you answered it partly already, Yaku. The one is from Zukiswe that said, is it possible to own a property through a newly registered company? That's the first one. Then aligned to that, somebody said, which entity? I think you told us which entity, but I think most importantly, aligned to that, what is a recommended structure for property investment? You heard a PTY limit is a better structure than trust because of the tax rate. So we're talking about tax. So on the first one is it a newly registered company? Can you do that? And then let's talk a little bit about this tax in trusts versus companies.
Fantastic. Great. So very good questions. We've got a very intelligent audience here today, and structuring is crucial, and you want to make sure that you do your structuring right. Now, one of the most frequently asked questions that I get is, but how are you going to get financing if you register this new trust or company now and try and get financing? Because this company, someone told me that you have to have 2 years financials, and without that, you can't get financing. And that is often the case when you work with agents or bond originators that don't understand the structure correctly, because it's very possible to get 100% financing in a newly registered entity. What will happen, however, is you as the director or the trustee of the entity will sign surety. So they will still look at your affordability. They will still look at if you can afford to get the financing. So structuring isn't a golden ticket to get unlimited financing, but it definitely makes it much more possible for you to get financing on multiple properties. But a newly registered entity, can you get financing? Absolutely. Just use a good bond originator that understands structures and understands how to apply for financing with an entity. And then with the correct structure that needs to be in place, there always has to be a trust in the picture. Otherwise, you are the end owner or the final, the ultimate beneficial owner of the property, and those assets are exposed, and there's those costs on death that we spoke about. I always joke and say dying is extremely expensive. A quarter to a third of your wealth is wiped out the day you die if you didn't put your things in trust. So having a trust in the picture is very, very important. But from a practical perspective, what we've seen works very well is owning your properties in a company and having your company shares sit in the trust. So your trust is the shareholder or the owner of your company, and your company owns the properties. It's also very nice because the company tax rate is only 27%. So although there are other benefits of owning property directly in the trust, like the conduit principle, it works very nicely having that lower tax bracket or that 20% tax rate on a company for all the profits that you keep within the entity.
That's wonderful. And I think that applies for yours as well, Rita, as well. If you're going to get into student accommodation, you want to de-risk yourself as well. Okay, let's jump into the questions. And so nicely put there. Thanks, Yaku. Edgar's asked a few ones. How do you screen students for affordability and enter into a contract with them? Good one, eh?
Well, that's an easy one. You don't, because they
There we
are
go.
horrible at paying landlords. Okay, so definitely, if they are NSFAS students, obviously their parents will never qualify. They won't qualify. So you are relying there on the bursaries, right? So you need to decide whether you're happy to deal with NSFAS and all their drama and processes, which is very doable. 90% of our guys are NSFAS students. But you need to decide that for yourself. And then, of course, if it's private students, the surety of that lease has to be done by the parent, and you then screen the parent, not the student. And that is basically, and you'll do that on TPN and their reports and things like that. So that's
excellent.
Give me more
Good.
difficult one.
Okay, yes, the one with regards to evictions. Okay, and if the students don't pay, how do you evict them? Is the process similar to the eviction of normal tenants for buy-to-let?
So it's not the same, luckily. It's definitely easier to evict a student. But the good news is that you don't normally, we send them a letter of demand, you talk to the parents, you kind of just put pressure on the student and the parent. And guys, I don't know if you are parents, but as a parent, I can tell you, I don't want my child to even think about they might be in the streets tomorrow and I'm not there to help them, or because they're far away from home, right? So the moment there's pressure for payment, generally the parents will make a plan and they will make a payment. Okay. The legal process is also different. I don't know if you guys saw there was a ruling that Respublica went to court and they said, well, it's not your normal your normal place of residence. It's actually more like you're in a temporary hotel, like a similar hotel type of scenario. So there's still documents that legal documents that you have to serve on them, letter of demand, all of those things. But the actual eviction process is a lot shorter. But to be honest, I've never gotten to the point where I had to follow that legal process. Just the pressure on the parents and the students are generally enough for them to make payment or to move out.
Okay, and then there's a question I want to just finish off on the student thing. Who will pay for the student? I mean, we're talking about NSFAS now. So maybe you want to just elaborate a little bit on that, what it is,
yeah,
and who will pay for them.
Yeah. NSFAS is the bursary, National Student Financial Aid Scheme. It's a bursary that's given by the state to under people with low incomes, lower than 350,000 a year. Then they qualify for that, and then NSFAS will pay either the landlords directly, or which is what they're trying to do now, or they will pay the university, and then the university pays you. So the money doesn't go to the students first, otherwise chances are you're not going to see it. But luckily they pay the landlord directly, and then of course private students, the parents will pay for those students, or bursaries, right? Because there's also other bursaries out there. Don't forget about those. There's charity organizations, the municipality gives bursaries. There's lots of things like that. But generally, the NSFAS or whoever university will pay the landlord directly. Because I know that's normally the biggest question that people have is like, will the student pay me or the university? And not for all places. So it's important that some institutions are different. Like TVET colleges, there's 90% of those don't pay. They'll pay the student, and the student must pay you. But in general, the big universities will pay the landlords directly. UCT pays the students, but then if they don't pay you, you send a mail to the university and they suspend those students immediately. So they don't take chances like that. Yeah, so it's unfortunately not an easy answer. It's a little bit different. Depending on where you are.
So I can't believe where the time has just gone. Time has just disappeared. But I'm just putting this up now, guys. So I'm going to give everybody a chance to have their final say. So I'm not going to just leave you all in the lurch over here. We'd love to carry on this discussion for the next hour, because really there's been some fantastic things that come out. There have been really awesome questions too. And so what I want to encourage you all, before I ask everybody to close off, so everybody don't disappear yet, I'm going to ask Estiana to close off, and ask Jaco to close off, their parting shots, and also Rita as well. But come and see us. We're in Johannesburg next week. Come and join us, and that's at 5 o'clock from next Thursday. And it's for free. It's for free. Come and meet us if you've got questions and stuff. And this is a great opportunity to meet the team here. And in fact, you can come from 9 o'clock in the morning already. There's a full exhibition, and I know Rita has got a stand. I know that Estiani's got a stand. In fact, they're all there. So why don't you come at 9 o'clock and join us in the evening for a nice chit chat as well, and a great presentation. I think it's really been very insightful, and that's to the Money Summit Property Investing Forum. And you just you click on the link below. It's in the other box, the chat box there, and you just put in REI guest, and it's for free. And it does close on the Wednesday evening next week. So please, everybody, this is a great opportunity. Then obviously, and Yaku can give you opportunity. I know you also got some courses, but you can show us a little bit later. But, there's a book that Rita wrote. It's Creating Wealth with Student Accommodation in South Africa. But if you want to actually learn about this, there's a full day course. It's on Saturday, the 16th of September. And that's going to be in Rivonia, in Johannesburg. It's from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock. So you will get time to see the rugby and all that stuff, if you are fanatic. So don't worry. But you get the book, which is included, and you get a workbook. And then you walk away with a wealth of, we had a very successful one in Cape Town recently. And so I encourage you to go along. And if you really want to get into the student accommodation, this is the place to come along. So there's a link at the bottom. There's only 1,750 Rand per ticket. If there's two of you, it works out to 1,500 Rands a ticket, and that's 3,000 for two. So please join us for that. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask first Estiani to give her closing parting shots. And then I'm going to ask Yaku, and Yaku also has a book, and he also has some courses that he'd like to invite you to. But I'm encouraging you first and foremost to come and join us next week in Johannesburg at the Sandton Convention Center from 9 o'clock to 8 o'clock at night. We'll all be there. So we've got lots of questions here from everybody, which I'd love to be able to actually deal with them all right now, but we just don't have the time to do that. And I just want to, thank you just really for being, really engaging today, but come along to this event. So Estiani, your closing parting shots, your final thoughts, maybe where people can walk away and say, well, wow, that's a great piece of information.
Yes, thanks, Neil. It was awesome to be engaging the attendees today. I think the most important thing is to know your numbers. In previous years, there wasn't the platforms that we currently have to understand the market, to understand the area. So, Lifestone provides the data, and I would like to encourage, especially property investors, go and look at the data, look at your numbers, understand your market. It's at your disposal. So, happy to help where we can, but go and learn more about real estate from a data perspective.
Wonderful. Great. So once again, unfortunately, somebody did ask any possibility of adding online access. We won't be doing online access in particular for this one. That's why we're having this webinar, but I'm happy to do a follow-up webinar. I think this is really awesome. I think we've got to do more of this stuff, this data sharing, this information sharing with all our experts surrounded us. We've got to do this more often. But you've got an opportunity, as I say, to come along, next week and see us live if you're in the Johannesburg area. We'll get to Cape Town. Don't worry. We'll get to Cape Town. We'll do live events there too for you as well. We'll get to Bloemfontein. We'll get to those areas. Yaku, your parting shots, and I know you also got to invite people to some of your events too.
Thanks, Neil. It was such a privilege to talk to you all and to have Estiani and Rita with me as panelists. And thank you, Neil, for hosting this. And I just want to say that the starting point of property investment, and this is something that should never stop, is the most important investment that you can make is in yourself. You can only produce that what is in you. So if you want to be a successful property investor, you have to invest in yourself. And there's some great resources available for you to invest in yourself. If you are into student accommodation, definitely read Rita's book. I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I couldn't put it down, actually. So it's a highly recommended book. And then if you want to learn more about property investment and how to invest in property, you can buy my book, Prosperity Through Property. It's available online. You can buy the ebook or the hard copy. We courier it to everywhere in the country for you, or anywhere in the country for you. and we'll drop a link for you on that as well. And then I want to encourage you that if you want to meet with me, you can do a one-on-one consultation with me. There's a QR code on the screen. You can scan it. You can book a consultation with me, and I can sit with you. We can look at your strategy. We can look at your structuring. We can make sure that we put the correct structures in place for you and help you to lay that foundation for you to build your property portfolio properly. You can also get more information on this on prosperityenterprises.co.za. And then lastly, I want to encourage you to come to our events. We've got a full-day property investment seminar where we educate people, where we equip people, where we give people all the tools and resources that they need in order to build their property portfolio. So this Saturday, actually, also we are in Port Elizabeth or in Gqeberha, where we are hosting our live full-day seminar there. In October, we will be in Cape Town, and in December, we will be in Johannesburg. So make sure. You can also book your ticket on our website, prosperityenterprises.co.za, for a live seminar near you. And then lastly, if you want to get more information from me, if you want to be on our newsletter, if you want to get articles and get more information on property investment, you are welcome to subscribe to our newsletter. The QR code is on the screen. And if there's any more information that you need, subscribing will be of great benefit for you. Thank you once again for today. It was lovely meeting with all of you, and I wish you all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jaco. Can you just close down just your screen? Thank you very much. It's wonderful. I think really it's been a fantastic discussion today. And last but not least, Rita, your parting shots to everybody. We've already given the invite, but yeah, your final thoughts before we end off.
I think if you're still thinking and you're still scared to start with student accommodation, I get it. Okay. It is a scary thing to do by yourself. If you don't know what you're doing, you don't know where to get the students from, you don't know, will you even get paid by these universities and all of that. So it takes a bit of a mind shift to get over that. But I want to say that, you're not alone. We literally do, in the areas where we have offices, we will help you turnkey with every single step of the way. We'll do it for you. A lot of our investors some of them have not even been to their properties. Yes, I know it's weird, but they get a report and they get their money every month that we collect, we pay over. So we do literally everything for you, from finding the property, placing the students, managing the students. We deal with the parties on weekends if there are issues, disciplinary actions, whatever, you name it, we deal with it. So don't feel like you have to be scared or overwhelmed by all of this. Literally we are there to help you with everything that you need. And that's in mystudenthouse.co.za. You can send us an email to getinfo@mystudenthouse.co.za if you need help or advice with anything.
Wonderful. I think that was a great way to finish off, but we're not disappearing, people, because we're going to see you live next week. So come and see us. We will also be back online. Definitely, I think we've got to do a follow-up presentation on this. Has been fantastic. I know somebody did query pricing over there. We'll fix that for you. So just phone the office. We can sort that out. To our panelists, thank you for sharing your valuable insights and your investment expertise with us today. And I think it's really been eye-opening for many of us. And to our audience, we always appreciate your active participation. And so as I mentioned, there's 2 events. It's next Thursday, and that will be from 9 o'clock, and it's free. That's the live property investing forum that starts at 5 o'clock, from 5 onwards for registration. It will probably kick off at 6 o'clock to just after 8, and it's building wealth in South Africa. So you're going to see us all 3 there. In fact, all 4 of us, plus 2. Just to book, you just click on that code, the REI guest. And then, of course, on Saturday, the live masterclass, the great student investment masterclass course, which is from 8. It's 1 for 2 of you, it's 3,000, and for 1 ticket, 1,750. So let's if you want to learn about it, this is the place to go along. So you just click on those links. It's at the bottom of the page. It's on the page on the chat box. So once again, thank you to our esteemed panel, to Rita, Estiani, Jaco, thank you very much for creating, really incredible insights and for joining us, you, the audience. We all look forward to seeing you at the Property Investing Forum next week. And to our audience, we wish you all the best on your path to success and wealth creation. Please reach out to our team that's over here. Come and see us. Come and talk to us. Until our next live event, which is next Thursday, the 14th of September in Johannesburg. And then, of course, the Saturday student accommodation event on the 16th. And our next webinar will be on the 21st of September at 12. Stay safe and successful investing. This is Neil Peterson of Real Estate Investors signing out along with our panel of Yaku, Estiani, and Rieta. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for joining us.